Hello again, and welcome to our final panel, which is the geopolitical panel. We would like to welcome Mr. George Pagoulatos, who is a professor of European politics and economy at the Athens University of Economics and Business, while also a visiting professor at the College of Europe in Bruges, and he is the Director General of Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, widely known as ELIAMEB, which is Greece's leading European and foreign policy think tank. We would also like, his title of speech is the EU and Euro-Atlantic relations in the Biden era. We would also like to welcome Mr. Juan Schinas, who is the parliamentary assistant at the European Parliament. He will be talking to us about towards European strategic autonomy. We would also like to welcome Mr. Dimitris Karamitsos-Giras, who is an ambassador and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs liaison to Greece 2021 National Committee. He also was the ambassador to the UK and the MFA's Director General of European Affairs. Finally, we would like to welcome Mr. Kostas Botopoulos, who is the capital markets partner at the Lambardios law firm and an advisor to the Bank of Greece. He also was a member of the European Parliament and a chair of the chair of the Greek Capital Markets Commission. Now, let us start with a quick introduction. So, amidst a global pandemic, and with Biden on the wheel, and China on a rapid economic growth, the cards, we can say, are quickly being shuffled, raising many questions. In parallel, the Brexit has turned the European world upside down, and its consequences are still to be seen. So some questions which will be raised in the panel are, what does the future hold for transatlantic relations in the Biden and Kamala era? How will the victory of Biden affect the EU trade deal? What should the EU approach towards new and old rivals be? So China, Russia, Turkey, etc. And finally, what is the EU soft power in the international context, and how can Europeans use it? So we would first, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Pagoulatos to begin his speech about the EU and Euro-Atlantic relations in the Biden era.
Thank you very much, Santi, and thank you all for the invitation. Congratulations for your initiative. I hope you can hear me. It's good to see you all, see all the new friends on my screen. Hello, Costa. Let me just place the background. How long do I have? 10 minutes to do something?
Excuse me, could you speak up a bit because we cannot hear you well?
How long do I have? Is it 10 minutes? Or
sure, you can have 10 minutes. Sure.
Okay. The EU-US partnership is a long partnership that goes back to at least the post-war period, or one can go even further. The first.
I'm sorry, we cannot hear you well.
I don't know why this is the case. Let me see. Is this an improvement? Is this any better?
Yeah, quite. Sure.
Okay. So the transatlantic partnership goes back to at least the end of the Second World War and the Cold War, when the EU and the US and the EU were very closely coordinated in the Cold War environment. It has developed, I would say, quite smoothly in terms of the strategic commitment of both the US and the EU in sticking to this close partnership, despite, of course, differences of views and interests and turbulences and all kinds of setbacks. The greatest, the most important setback over the last 70 years or so has been the 4 years under the Trump administration. That was the first time throughout the post-war period where the US was viewing the European Union as a foe rather than just a competitor. And therefore, after these 4 years of winter in transatlantic relations, Europe was immensely relieved to record the victory of President Biden in the recent elections. which kind of marked the end of this long 4-year winter and the beginning of the revival of the close partnership. Now, together, the European Union and the US are a very strong force in the world. Combined, they bring together about 1 billion people in the world. They amount for about 1/3 of global GDP and about 60% of global FDI. So that's a very important force to reckon with, and it's a very important pillar of the global multilateral system. And the global multilateral system, the global system of international institutions and organizations of international law, is the system that has been created largely by the initiative of the United States and its European Union partners, mostly during the post-war period. And the Biden administration signaled a return to that global multilateral system by, among others, reviving the World Trade Organization, reviving the importance of the World Health Organization and returning the US to that, going back to the Paris Agreement on climate change, which is extremely important for the European Union, and among other things, also signaling a return to the JCPOA, that is the treaty for the control of the nuclear program of Iran, which was jointly developed through a close partnership between the European Union and the US, along with other countries of the world. So all these were very positive signs by the Biden administration for the European Union, and they have been launched within the first 100 days of the Biden administration. This has been probably the most effective.
I'm sorry, but we still cannot hear you well.
Let me try and see. Would someone else like to take the floor so I don't take the time, and I can follow up after trying to join you with my headphones. Okay.
Could you check your microphone maybe, or your Wi-Fi connection?
My Wi-Fi connection is fine because I have a cable, but I'll try and connect over headphones. Let me try this right now. Let me see if headphones work better. Sorry for this.
Is this any better?
Oh yeah, it's perfect now.
Good. I should have thought of that earlier.
Thank you.
So, as I was saying, these first 100 days of the Biden administration have been extremely important for the European Union, because the Biden administration did exactly what the European partners wanted and expected from the United States, right? So they signaled the return of the United States to the transatlantic alliance and to the global multilateral system, which has been operating to the joint benefit of the United States and the European Union. Let me remind you that the European Union is a global superpower in trade and a regulatory superpower. If there is one area where the European Union can claim to be a superpower, it is on global trade and regulation. And I say that because it is important for the European Union to be able to function in a world which is rules-based, which is ruled by international treaties, by international law, and by the multilateral institutions that have the global system has seen and has developed over the recent decades. Now, all these developments that I mentioned, the return of the US under the Biden administration to this global system, have been welcomed by the European Union, along with the fact that the US has joined the COVAX system. We are under a global pandemic. The COVAX system is the global vaccines system platform that has been developed. And the European Union invited the US to join that. And there is, of course, there are other signals as well that are important on the part of the US, and not just rhetorically, but they signal a shift of policy from the dark Trump period. Among others, the so-called Summit of Democracy, which is the importance of what President Biden has called an alliance of democracies in the world as allies for the United States in a joint transatlantic partnership with the European Union. An alliance of democracies, meaning, and was Summit of Democracy, meaning that the United States under the Biden administration will be prioritizing democracies, liberal democracies among its allies, and trying to cut off the kind of relations that were developed under the Trump regime indiscriminately with various authoritarian regimes, or at least prioritizing the significance of liberal democracy and its defense in the world. Now, all these are the good news, and there's a lot of good news, and there's a lot of positive signals that are being emitted and kind of followed up by very significant policy shifts by the Biden administration, and the choice of people that he has laid forward in his administration, committed transatlanticists and pro-Europeans. Himself is one of the most experienced presidents that have ever set foot in the White House, and a very staunch defender of the Euro-Atlantic partnership. But there are also challenges. And the first challenge stems from the fact that even though the European Union and the United States see eye to eye when it comes to values, the value of liberal democracy and defending it in the world, the value of the importance of the global multilateral system, at least the Biden administration and the European Union, there are also different interests in several areas. And there are frictions as well, and there are different standpoints. So one of these different standpoints has to do with the pressure that is being exercised by the US throughout the US administrations on NATO partners to raise their defense spending close to the 2% target that's been set by the US. Now, it's interesting to note that the Greece is the sole EU member state that has defense spending over 2%. Of course, this is a quantitative target that does not always denote kind of a qualitative content, and this is what European partners are trying to put in the discussion, that we also need to define that in qualitative terms. Now, there are other countries that are also rising to the 2% target. There's also an EU-US defense dialogue, structured EU defense dialogue that has been launched. And it is clear that the US is signaling a closer commitment to the transatlantic alliance, much closer, much more committed compared to the Trump administration. Now, an area of frictions is also trade in the broader sense, and some tendencies on the part of the US towards protectionism. What the Biden administration has called the Buy American policy, which is that in this bold investment stimulus that the Biden administration has launched, it is inviting US-based companies to bid for participating in this investment stimulus, and the Europeans are feeling that they're being left outside. So this is an area of concern, and there's also an area of concern having to do with other trade frictions that I will not enter to in greater detail because I would probably bore you. Now, an important issue for Europeans is the fair taxation of technology companies. Now, technology companies, the so-called GAFA is not the Greek word GAFA. It denotes Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, kind of the four giants in the tech industry. And the Europeans are not able so far to tax them in an effective way. These companies are able to exploit tax avoidance schemes and reduce the tax burden that they pay, especially to European Union countries. And that is a major issue for the European Union, including the regulation of these platforms. Recently, two digital acts have been produced as drafts by the European Commission in that area. Now, it is important that the Biden administration has done something which is very bold for US standards. It has signaled that it will seek to cooperate, to coordinate with other OECD partners, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is the organization comprising the developed economies in the world, will coordinate towards coordinating a kind of a minimum corporate tax rate at the level of 21%, thus trying to go after companies that are avoiding tax, that are exploiting tax avoidance schemes in order to minimize the taxes that they pay. And tax revenues are very important because all governments, the US government with a 6 trillion total stimulus plan, the European Union governments with their own stimulus plans will need tax revenues. And it's important to get these tax revenues from where they can come from. So there is an effort to tax companies and prevent tax avoidance opportunities. And there, the European Union sees eye to eye, even though there are countries inside the European Union that are supporters of greater tax competition. Ireland is one of them, some of the Malta is another, some Eastern European countries and so forth. But that is an area where there is some convergence. An area where there is probably less convergence, I would say there is competition, but also elements of strategic convergence is technology. When it comes to advanced technology, 5G, let alone 6G or artificial intelligence, the United States leads the world. China also leads the world. The European Union is lagging behind. And the European Union is seeking to develop a greater leadership in these areas because it understands that technology is an extremely important area, not just in terms of economic development and trade competitiveness, but also in terms of security, because these are areas that are very close to state security and state power, the ability to exploit artificial intelligence technologies and advance state power in the world. And this brings me to China, because China, along with the question of how to deal with other authoritarian or semi-authoritarian illiberal regimes like Russia or like Turkey, is a major issue in the transatlantic agenda, in the EU-US agenda. And even though the European Union, after Trump, is clearly an ally to the US vis-a-vis China, we live in an increasingly bipolar world. You could call it also multipolar, but there is an emerging Cold War between the US and its allies and China. At least this is how it is viewed by many in the US foreign policy establishment. Even if it is not called the Cold War by its name, there is an increasing tendency to see China as the single most important systemic rival for the US and the EU. And by the way, systemic rival is the term that the European Union also uses for China, along with trade competitor and along with partner in multilateral institutions, such as, for example, in combating climate change. So on China, there is significant convergence, but there are also differences, because the European Union is more exposed to trade with China, is more keen to cooperate with China. It tends to follow a less confrontational mode compared to the US. And before the elections, it had reached an agreement on comprehensive investment with China, which now it has put on the deep freezer. And so there are some divergences on how to deal with China. And there are some divergences of view on how to deal with Russia as well. The Biden administration is clearly sees Russia as a rival, a strategic rival. It has it is diverging on that from the Trump administration, which was a divergence from the traditional US policy vis-a-vis Russia, which always viewed Russia as a rival. The EU is kind of divided on that because, among others, it doesn't have a truly single and a truly common foreign and security policy, because foreign policy is not an entirely integrated policy area, and there are different national strategies and different national views on how to deal with China and how to deal with Russia, also largely depending on the invested commercial interests and economic relations between various EU countries towards these countries. And I've left Russia as the last item because, Turkey, because Turkey is an issue that obviously is of greater concern for us, but it is also an issue where the European Union does not have a truly, or I should rather say, a fully integrated foreign policy. There are different views within the European Union how to deal with Turkey. And that does not allow a bolder stance vis-a-vis Turkey. On the other hand, the European Union has a clear policy vis-a-vis Turkey when it comes to the general framework. It wants to view Turkey as a trade partner and a country which has a different system, an illiberal system, an authoritarian-prone system, which does not abide by the rule of law, either within or outside its borders, has been a troublemaker in the Eastern Mediterranean, and it has a positive agenda of engaging Turkey, not towards a realistic membership prospect, which exists only in name, but in terms of a positive agenda that has various items, including the upgrading of the customs union, which Turkey feels strongly about. But in order to do that, there is a very strict set of conditions. And this conditionality is the kind of the sticks in the carrot and sticks approach that the European Union applies towards Turkey. The European Union wants a stable region in the Eastern Mediterranean. On that, it fully coincides with the view of the United States, which wants stability in the region, which is not happy with the adventurism that the Erdogan government has shown in the region. The Erdogan government has rushed to fill the void of the US departure from the Eastern Mediterranean and the region, and along with Russia. This has not been viewed positively by the US, and of course, it has not been viewed positively at all by the United States. The fact that Turkey has bought a missile system, the S-400, from Russia. This is viewed as a sort of a policy of even of treason vis-a-vis the obligations that a NATO member state should have to the transatlantic alliance, which is not to introduce defense equipment from rival states such as Russia. So on all these issues, the European Union converges with the United States, tends to see eye to eye, despite minor differences or more significant differences. There is a strong sense on both sides that they have to forge a closer transatlantic partnership. From the standpoint of the European Union, the US is not what it used to be. The 4 years of the Trump period have been traumatic for the European Union. The Europeans are seeing the Republicans under Trump's influence lurking on the background. There is a significant statistical probability that Trumpism under a Republican administration could return, and thus they do not know whether they will be able to work together with the US administration, as they will be doing under the Biden administration in the next or the next after the next administration, and hence an agenda of strategic autonomy had developed during the dark years of the Trump period, a challenge for the European Union to develop its own strategic autonomy, its own capabilities to promote its interests in the world. I'm sure that Juan Schinas will discuss that in his presentation. this strategic autonomy approach is now shifting closer to a Euro-Atlanticist approach, to an approach that prioritizes close EU-US partnership, but the orientation remains towards the effort of the European Union to establish a more coherent policy at the global level, and of course a more stable and enduring transatlantic partnership with the US. And I think I'll shut up at this point, and thank you for enduring this, including the technical challenges that we have faced. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interesting speech upon the EU's transatlantic relations with the US and China's and Turkey's role in the global political sphere. And I would like to move on and give the floor to Mr. Juan Sinas, who will talk to us about, in his speech, about towards European strategic autonomy.
Thank you, Stathis. Everyone can hear me well? Yep, perfect. Thank you, Stathis, and thanks to all the organizers, Katerina, the whole OurEuropeDay team for making this event happening. I'm sure it must have been quite a challenge. And thank you for the invitation as well to speak today in such a distinguished panel. I have to say the title of my intervention is Towards Strategic Autonomy, but it is a bit of a clickbait to lure you in. I want to discuss a few points, a few more general points about how the European Union has been conducting foreign policy in the last years, and especially following Professor Pavoulatos's intervention. I think it might be quite timely. I believe that many of us have seen a bit of an expectations gap when it comes to our collective European presence in the world stage. On the one hand, there are demands of European citizens, and on the other hand, there's what the European Union actually does, or more importantly, what it is able to do. Polls after polls show that our citizens want an EU that is more present, more active in the world, with its own autonomous behavior based on our collective values. But our citizens do not really see this. Instead, they get flashy headlines like Sofagate, the famous visit of President von der Leyen in Ankara, or headlines like the one involving High Representative Borrell's visit to Moscow a couple of months ago. I think most importantly, many of our citizens feel like our foreign policy, the European Union foreign policy, doesn't reflect their priorities. I think it's not very difficult to find, to hear criticism of the EU's foreign policy in Greece, where there seems to be a general consensus that the EU is too appeasing to Turkey. So I want to touch upon these points and ask exactly why does this happen? Why do we get these headlines, and why is there this expectation gap? Is it that Brussels does not care, that Brussels does not understand the language of diplomacy, that they are inept? I think it's important, clearly, to keep in mind that the EU position, any EU position, more often than not, is the lowest common denominator of 27 member states. And it is not difficult to understand what that entails. Our collective position on sanctions, on statements, or generally relations with third countries. Everything is influenced by the fact that member states have to agree, and specifically that they must do so unanimously. So I think that leads to a lot of people asking themselves, okay, if we got rid of unanimity, that would solve all our problems, because a few countries cannot block major foreign policy decisions or strategies that all Europeans want. And here, this idea of limiting unanimity, I think it's interesting, because on the one hand, it is true that if we had qualified majority for certain decisions, countries like Hungary, for example, would not be able to block strong statements like the one regarding Hong Kong a couple of days ago. But here, it's also important to remember that European governments negotiate about everything all the time. So unanimity is what keeps everyone civil. Your enemy on one negotiation might be your ally on the next. And this means that you have to pick your battles. It means that you actually have to sit down and negotiate. So I think if we get rid of unanimity, that means that certain member states will start to feel like they're not listened to because they might not be mathematically needed, let's say. I think it's a dangerous precedent and arguably goes a bit against what our political union claims to be. I think it's also important in this debate to keep in mind that we are talking about voting Athens for political decisions, just decisions, because implementation then is a whole another thing. a member state who got outvoted on a decision, or it might not be too keen to implement this decision afterwards. And decisions are better implemented when everyone has agreed. We shouldn't underestimate the legal and the political maneuvering the member states have to simply ignore European decisions or strategies, especially in the realm of foreign policy. So I think I guess my main argument with this is that the debate on unanimity or not unanimity in foreign policy is not a simple one. That it's a legitimate discussion, but it's definitely not a simple one. And I just went, I think it's important to understand that it is not the main factor why stopping the EU from being a feared and united actor in the world stage. I think an often forgotten point has to do more with politics and solidarity. I think that the truth is that Europeans vote not based on challenges of the EU as a whole, but of their country. So in other words, there's simply no empathy among our societies for the challenges of each other. The reason why the EU might seem soft on Turkey might simply boil down to the fact that Greek legitimate concerns are not shared by other European societies. And this is felt at a political level. So I think for an interesting exercise is to ask all our listeners, all our students in this talk, when is the last time that we try to empathize with the challenges of other European countries that did not affect us directly? Do we try to sympathize with our Baltic and Eastern European friends when they feel threatened by Russia? Do we try to understand why Catalan secessionism is an existential fear for some Spaniards, for example? So my point is not necessarily to grade these challenges to say they are the same, because they're not the same clearly. My point is that solidarity is a two-way street. And until Europeans think and see challenges from a European perspective, the EU will find it harder to offer a unified and coherent stance. I also want to make a final point that the European Union is now building truly for the first time the basis of a collective foreign policy. And when I say basis, I mean an institutional basis, because let's not forget this is all new. As Professor Pavulato said before, the strategic autonomy in this debate has been occurring arguably after the Trump election and Brexit, so 5 years. The External Action Service has been around for 10 years. Our institutional setup with a President of the European Council, President of the Commission, a High Representative, delegations of the EU around the world, all this is quite new. And most importantly, it's a result of a political compromise, which means that it's messy. I like to draw the parallel in the United States. It's the same reason why a state like Wyoming has the same senators as the state of California. It's a political compromise. And these are never ideal. They represent the lowest common denominator. They represent what was able to be agreed in order to move forward. So I believe that the whole debate about strategic autonomy basically relates to our place in the world. It is an important discussion that we need to have. As Professor Pavulatos also mentioned before, the Brussels effect, this is an indisputable part of this conversation. But we are talking about, when we talk about strategic autonomy in a more realpolitik kind of way, we are talking about our place in the world without having established the fact, at least our societies, having established the fact that we are one. So, the European Union has always been a bit of an elitist project in the sense that it was spearheaded by political and economic elites who understood the need for it, politically, morally, economically. But at some point, the steps we are taking have to be followed by genuine solidarity among European citizens, because otherwise this is where we end up with this expectation gap. Those are my 2 cents. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much for this enlightening speech. And I would now like to pass the floor to Mr. Giras, who will talk to us about the post-Brexit EU.
Well, hello. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. First of all, thank you for a very interesting conference. Thank you to you, Stathis, Katerina, also Elena, Liki, and all the others behind it, and to all the panelists that so far have given very, very interesting insight on Europe. early this morning, Commission Vice President Schinas mentioned the three generations of the EU, the one who conceived it, the one who lived through it, and the one who aspires to live in the future. Personally, as a professional, I think I belong to the generation that started its professional career while Greece joined the EU. And it was something to look forward to, but also something to explore. And don't forget that at the time of Greece's joining, the preparedness of the system, the mechanism was quite different from what it is today. So a lot of things had to come in a practical way while we were in it. The second general point I want to make is that this panel discusses mostly on foreign and security policy of the EU, which is, as you know, the field that there is no common policy. So that makes it sometimes a bit problematic in the sense you discuss issues that are not within the sphere of common agreement of the member states, but also that makes it exciting because it's a very interesting exercise to try and find common ground. Brexit is a crisis that came to the EU, the third crisis in a row after the sovereign debt crisis and after migration. These are perpetuating crises for the EU. So that crisis is not still over, and not only for Greece, but for many member states, and maybe the debt crisis will be linked also to the pandemic and to the post-pandemic effects on the economy. Migration is, of course, an ongoing issue, but both the debt crisis and migration, one can say that could have been foreseen. I mean, there were signs of them quite early. The debt crisis, whether you consider it a cyclical crisis or you consider it a one-off, there were signs on it from the other side of the Atlantic, and also the migration crisis was something that was sending signals since already 2011. While Brexit was sudden, I don't refer to the process of the referendum. That was a political decision that was properly announced, but the result was unexpected. And it was unexpected even by the UK and also by the Europeans. Brexit had several factors in it. Of course, you have this economic concerns of the UK, that the EU was an economic society that was going too far. You have this psychological effect that the UK, the Britons have about not really wanting to belong fully or too much into an association, either themselves with their own historic past, they want to be distinct. And of course, you have the very strong political element into Brexit, which many people say, I think, without digging too much, that this was, an internal politics game of the Conservative Party, but it is not true. I mean, Brexit, the referendum gave the opportunity to political and business forces to put on the table, and very strongly, a different policy that at the end won. What was also interesting, and I want to finish with the UK and Brexit, was that the fact that very uncharacteristically for the UK, London went unprepared to this process and unprepared for the result. The EU, on the contrary, after the initial shock of the result of the referendum, approached the issue as it should have done, in a very concrete and very concise European way, with full legal and technical approach, and not political as the UK did. The way ahead after Brexit is different, I think, for the two sides. The UK will go through a big sea change in terms of its business and trade, in terms of its administration, and in terms of course, its foreign policy defense, which probably in the UK will be more NATO in defense and an unknown foreign policy for them, besides, of course, the strong transatlantic relationship. For Europe is very interesting because every crisis is a challenge, and the EU, of course, will be able to forge ahead with its own integration, while continuing to support the basic European model, human rights, rule of law, democracy, protection of the social network, but also an opportunity to strengthen the EU's own foreign policy and defense policy. There was interesting points on that, Professor Pagoulatos, but also other speakers before, about why the EU doesn't move quicker into a common foreign policy. I think moving too fast will be a mistake, because first of all, it may divide partners, or it may create, even worse for a small country like Greece, a 2 or 3 tier foreign policy of different configuration of states, which is not good. So the answer to the challenge about the EU, the challenge of Brexit, I mean, is actually more Europe. This means, more Europe will mean a stronger Europe. It will mean that the European Union has already a strong political and economic pillar to build on, but it's also a union built on solidarity of member states. It's a welfare state, a strong social dimension, while it retains its own diversity. These are elements that are very difficult to bring together in a community. And in a sense, it is a luxury if you want to have all these elements at a higher level, but you have to. And, there is also Brexit, I believe, will make the EU stronger, because EU will have to rely also on the UK as a non-member partner rather than a third country competitor, which brings again the very interesting element of the transatlantic relationship that was very well put before. And I think that as we now enter the discussion of the future of Europe, all these issues are going to be put on the table. Initially, of course, from the top-down, the bottoms-up approach from this society, the civil society, the citizens of Europe, but also the governments will have to wage in very heavily on the discussion. As you know, the Greek government has already initiated the process of its position on that. And I'm glad that while we, and I end by this, I say it in my different capacity now, because I am assigned to support this Greece 2021 committee that oversees the commemoration and celebration of the 200 years, that this is also an issue that is on the agenda of the events that are being organized. And I think Eliamep, which also has a very strong saying to that. We're also working with them on a roundtable for a conference that will come in October on Europe. But I think it's also a discussion that the citizens themselves should participate very heavily, and mostly young people like most of our audience. I think I exceeded your time and your generosity, and I thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much for this interesting speech about Brexit. And I would like now to invite Mr. Botopoulos to talk to us the geopolitical shifts in Europe and the world around the pandemic. You're muted.
Okay, now that should do it. So hello, good evening to everybody. It's a real pleasure to first of all reconnecting with my old school from 40 years ago, in an era where we didn't have either a bachelor in English or Zoom conferences for that matter, even cell phones for that matter, and also to be in a panel with two friends and two sons of friends. Stathis and Juan, so warm greetings to both Stamatis and Margaritis if they are with us today. It's a real pleasure to be part of this conference and this panel. The role which has been assigned to me at the end of our panel is to wrap up a bit the whole geopolitical landscape, if I may say, putting emphasis on three issues. First, globalization. Second, world politics, and third, EU developments. With two introductory remarks, if I may, all those shifts seen through the lens, if I may put it so, of the pandemic, which was both a catalyst and a revelator. It was a catalyst because all these shifts we're going to talk about were already there for us to see. Things were happening already, but the pandemic helped us or worked in a way crystallizing those developments and making political action much more urgent. That's the role that the pandemic had in this aspect. And also a revelator. I was reading this very interesting report of the World Health Organization, a very recent report which used this really frightening, but I think accurate expression that the pandemic was the Chernobyl of the 21st century. And not only that, it was, of course, Chernobyl is an accident, but an accident whereby mistakes by political actors and the scientific community have also been made. And it's very chilling to read the list of the errors which, according to this international organization, have been made throughout. Of course, there have been triumphs as well. And the first and the most important was the so quick development of the vaccines. But there were also many errors, so that we can speak of a Chernobyl of the 21st century. So through the lens of this, I would say, cataclysmic event, which has been the pandemic, a third major crisis in the 21st century, the terrorist and the Twin Tower crisis, the financial crisis, and a third one, Mr. Giras correctly also alluded to the migration crisis, and also now the pandemic crisis. So through the accelerating effect of those three crises, I think there has been an impact, as I said, on globalization, on global politics, and on the EU. First of all, on globalization, what I think appeared through this accelerating influence of the pandemic was that what we call the globalization process, which is mainly but not exclusively an economic process, of course was a force which put many people out of poverty, which had very important distributory effects, which would put more wealth in the world, but also had three very important side effects or even direct effects. It pushed the world economy to financiarization, so to the financial markets, to non-productive economic activities. This is something that both George Pagulatos and I have very much worked on, the impact of financialization on both the economy and the European Union. The second was the impact on inequality, the fact that this globalization has had a very an effect on inequality, and we have much more inequality, much more wealth, and also at the same time much more inequality in the world. And the third effect was that this kind of globalization, very open in some aspects, very closed in some others, could not cater to the systemic crises, all three crises we have talked about, and also could not give adequate, I would say, answers to the new problems that have emerged in the 21st century, namely and most importantly, the need to combat climate change, the digital gap, which Juan also alluded to, and also this effect of the inequality in the world. So what was the push that was given by the pandemic to those, as I said, pre-existing trends? First of all, green politics, green economy, a very hard push. Now we are in a situation whereby both in the United States, George spoke very eloquently about it, under the Biden organization, green economy is a priority. For the European Union, as we know, and I will come back to that, it is the number one priority, but I would say throughout the world, and most importantly also by the financial markets, this transition to another kind of economy and to criteria whereby money will be given to companies which abide by climate criteria is, I think, a very important global trend, since we are talking about globalization. The second one is the push to somehow tackle the digital gap. Again, a priority both for the United States, the European Union, the third world. There is a geopolitics of digitalization, dear friends. Only a fact, 80% of new chips, digital chips that are being made are produced by two countries, South Korea and Taiwan. So that's to see where trends are going and where the economy is also a very important geopolitical factor. And also on the front of combating inequality with the social programs, policies, which we are going to tackle just now. So that was the first point. I would call it rethinking globalization, because it's not a deep change, but it's, I think, an important change. The second point I would call it is reshaping global politics. How do we reshape global politics, and in what sense are they in a process of being reshaped? Since the beginning of the new century, since the beginning of the 21st century, we have had, albeit not many people have recognized this fact, a recess of democracy in the world. The golden era of modern democracy was in the late 80s and in the 90s, where what we call a democratic consensus was adopted in all parts of the world and by political parties of all of the main left and right denominations, if I may put it so. This is no more a fact. Today, 4/5 of the world, not of course only what we used to call the Western world, but the world at large, lives under not fully democratic regimes. Of course, this is due to the fact that the two biggest countries in the world, China and India, are not fully democratic. But also the third country, which is Indonesia, is not a fully democratic. And the fourth country, which is the US, was under President Trump, so only 6 months ago, deemed to be not fully democratic. So you understand how this recess, which we can find traces of in all continents, of course, Africa, Asia, in many parts, Latin America, a big recession of democracy in Latin America. So democracy is not in danger. I don't like this expression, but in a recession phases, and this is a major geopolitical event of the 21st century. The second major event is, of course, and I will not dedicate much of my time. I've written books about this issue, the rise of populism, which is linked to both the globalization process and also the recess of democracy. And the third one, everybody, I think, used the word, the key word China, is the new role of China in the world balance, in the power play at the world stage. On China, allow me only two words, supplementing what both George and Juan have said. China is an autocracy, so a non-democratic regime, which is also a global economic powerhouse with well-trained and cheap and immense labor force. So it's in a unique position to both impose the rules of the game, of the economy and global politics. And that's why, and Juan, you are completely right, that's why both the European Union and the United States perceive it as something to be dealt with, not only a menace, but something to be dealt with. Two dates are very important regarding China. 2001, the access of China in the World Trade Organization, which gives it the impetus to become a commercial and technological giant, which it wasn't before, and 2012, with the advent of the new leadership, Mr. Xi and the other new Chinese leaders, who adopt a not different, but a more extrovert, a more open leadership role in the world at large. And now we have a China today, which is both the first or the second technological power in the world, and most important, the first development and lending partner for all the other continents, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So China is both a democratic problem and a force to be reckoned with. It's the new powerhouse of the 21st century. And the way that the pandemic has pushed this power play is, I think, for the time being, it has made China even more powerful. Don't forget that the COVID started in China, but China was the first country to say that it has emerged from the pandemic, and also the first country to have economically grown under the pandemic. So China has an advantage, has acquired a new advantage under the pandemic, also dealing with those issues, and also with the new global power, balance of power is a very important issue. My third and last point is on the European Union. What are the trends and shifts in the European Union? I would put them in a more recent perspective. I think that the first revelator was the financial crisis, which revealed things that we already knew but became very apparent. What are those things? Solidarity, Juan spoke about it, or lack of solidarity, mainly. The fact that there was in a more technical lingo, a problem with what we call economic governance in the European Union. We don't lack rules. We don't even lack flexibility on dealing with crisis, the way that the European Union dealt with the Greek crisis, for example, where we didn't have the mechanisms, and we fabricated, we constructed the mechanism while the crisis was raging, is very illuminating, but we had a lack of political will, of political understanding, what we call economic governance in the European Union, and also a problem with the way the European Union, very important problem with the way that the European Union is being perceived by citizens. The famous, we don't talk very much about it, but it's still there, the famous democratic deficit. Now we have other deficits, probably more urgent to think and talk about, but still this idea that there's a democratic deficit, that the citizens are somehow not on board in this very important political adventure is still there. And at the end of the financial crisis, a new factor, a new menace appeared, which is, George alluded to that, the problem with the rule of law. The problem that within the European Union and at the geographical center of the European Union, we now have countries which openly defy what we call the democratic acquis, the rule of law of the European Union. So what was the push here of the pandemic? What was the accelerating effect of the pandemic? I think it was in four fields. First of all, I will be very brief. First of all, of course, the recovery fund, which is a momentous step, I think, for the European Union, not only in terms of quantity, the sums being amassed and allotted to the countries, but also in terms of philosophy. We have in real life shared debt and also political priorities for the money to be allotted to the countries. Green economy, digitalization, social cohesion. So the three main problems of globalization are being dealt with within the European Union with horizontal perspective. So this is, I think, a very important fact. Secondly, the progress that has been made also because of the Portuguese presidency, and we must say that on the social front, we recently had a social summit in Europe whereby it was enshrined that the so-called social pillar is together now with the economic pillar one of the motors of the European Union, and also policies to go along with that. And the third very also, I think, important fact, which was in fact programmed before, but now has a new light to it, is this famous conference on the future of Europe, whereby we have an opportunity to discuss all those issues. If you read the 9+1 themes of the conference, you have climate change, health, education, world affairs, rule of law, digital transition, democracy, migration, education, and culture, plus what the European Union in this very flowery sometimes language calls sleeping beauties, surprises that may come out of the citizens themselves proposing new ideas to the European leaders. So I think those three issues, talking with and to the citizens, really a new economic model of economic governance, and strengthening the social cohesions also have been accelerated by the pandemic, and are really a chance to, as I say, repoliticize the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your speeches. And we'll now begin with a discussion. So I would first like to direct a question to Mr. Pagoulatos. So what's in your opinion, does Joe Biden's election mean that the US and the EU will work together closer to alleviate dependency on China, but also to limit the rise of China in global politics and economics?
Well, yes, compared to what we would have had if we had the continuation of the previous administration, but with a footnote, which I tried to mention in my previous points. And the footnote is that the European Union does not have a fully coherent view within as to how we deal with China, mainly because the largest economies in the European Union are hugely dependent economically in terms of investment and in terms of trade on China. Also in terms of, for example, German exports to China are very significant. And these preferences and these interests create a significant degree of dependency of the European countries on China, even though strategically they tend to align with the US in containing China, because they do realize that China's trade ascendancy and eventually economic supremacy, at some point China will be exceeding the US as the largest economy in the world. It already does, by the way, in terms of purchasing power parity, and its strength in terms of technology. Some people say that China is seeking to create a world safe for authoritarianism by employing the opportunities that artificial intelligence and face recognition and other technologies that can be multipliers of authoritarian powers in the hands of authoritarian states. All this is strategically and politically important for the European Union, and on that it sees eye to eye with the US, but it also tries to defend its economic interests. And when it comes to economic interests, the European Union is not just one power, it is the totality of its member states, especially the largest member states, especially the largest economies within it.
Would anyone like to add something in the discussion? Mr. Esquinas?
If I may start this, thank you. I just to second what Professor Pagoulatos said, I think an important idea, and I think it's linked to what you were saying exactly, is that I believe that the Chinese Communist Party has understood that its interests in Europe are well guarded with a stronger European Union. So they understand that they do not see that as a threat, as opposed to, for example, Russia, whose goal is to sort of throw everything into chaos and then point to that as a testament that their own system is not that bad. And why I say that is because I think to link it to what I was saying about unanimity is that China has understood that, okay, a strong European Union goes towards interests, depending on what relationship we have with them. But thanks to the unanimity rule, we can have one or two partner countries that are closer to sort of stop the worst excesses. So, for example, a strong statement on what's happening in Hong Kong. So I think this is quite a different stance from what the United States has towards China, as Professor Pagoulatos was saying, which is much more hawkish. And we have really seen a change in the political paradigm and generally the whole machinery of the US government towards China. So these are two very different stances. I think one possibly also area of perhaps of cooperation, and here someone can correct me if I'm wrong, could be screening of critical investments. So as we know, China is heavily investing in various parts in the European Union, and especially in critical infrastructure. The European Union has shown its willingness to develop instruments and mechanisms to safeguard those critical infrastructures, so that so that China does not have any influence over critical parts of our economies. So this is something that I know that the European Union is focusing on and actually could partner with the US. But there's just a little add-on to the conversation.
Two points, if I may, also additional points. One is the very interesting example of the commercial treaty that has been signed and now is put on ice with China. So we see this kind of course, wish to work with China, but also take into consideration geopolitical and rule of law effects. And the second, on the rule of law, which becomes, as I said, I don't know if you all agree with me, it's maybe because of my profession that I give so much importance to the rule of law, but I think this is one of the crucial political points that the European Union will have to deal with in the years to come. And there, the situation of China is not similar to the ones with Poland and Hungary, for example, and other Visegrad and other countries, because the latter, all those countries are within the European Union and they should abide by what we call the democratic acquis, whereby China is of course not within the European Union, is seen as a third country, an important country where the rule of law is important, but does not hinder going into commercial and financial understanding. So it's a very subtle political and diplomatic game that is being played with China.
Mr. Giras, do you want to add something? You have raised your hand. We cannot hear you. You're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. I want to come back very shortly on Brexit from a different point of view. I think Brexit is important because it risks, if it's led to lead to a confrontation with Europe, economic confrontation, of course, not political, because both sides, of course, have common approaches on many issues, but especially on human contacts, on professional contacts, on the brain drain that the UK currently faces and the Europe will face from Brits working here. I think we have to be vigilant to continue and cultivate this relationship, even if it is a non-member state. And I think I mention this because the audience is mostly young people who start a professional career. And I think it would be a mistake to disregard the British, if you want, relationship with the UK in terms of everyday contacts, in terms of studies, in terms of business approach. And unfortunately, the political climate that culminated during the negotiations created some frictions that need to be smoothened and need to be normalized, because I think it's a common benefit to have a close partnership, even outside the EU. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there is nothing someone wants to add, we can continue to the next question. So another great topic, I think, and I would like to direct this question to Mr. Giras. So there has been the view that Britain should stop pretending that is an important power in the world after Brexit. And there has also been discussed that Britain will only become a US satellite in Europe, actually, post-Brexit Britain. On the other hand, it has also been discussed that Britain should have ambitions beyond Europe. So, as you pointed out, Britain went unprepared in the Brexit discussion. So, What, in your opinion, is the post-Brexit position for Britain?
I think the negotiations took longer than they should have, and this actually diluted the content of it in a sense, because it became too political, especially in the UK, but also in Europe in some sense. I think the UK is in the process now of a certain soul searching, but there are some fundamentals that will not change. We shouldn't forget that the UK is a very adaptive and flexible economy. It's a country that has a network of links around the world, not only through the Commonwealth, but also through the fact that it has a large business sector that operates everywhere. So, it's part of the Western, if you want, alliance or group of ideals, or if you want, rules. And in that sense, it's a natural ally. The mistake would be if we let this post-negotiation, if you want, blues to last longer than they should. And this, of course, is not only should not only be an EU concern, but also a UK concern. I think also, and probably this is the last point to my answer to your question, is the fact that the youth movement, in the sense, the contacts that young people need to continue having, must not exclude the UK. I know that the government in London, under the pressure of Brexit negotiation and internal fights, has taken some decisions to limit the participation of the UK in EU programs that have to do with youth, education, and others. But I think we should not, stop lobbying against that decision. I think this is where we start. In a sense, the UK was member. We went into the long process of doing undoing membership, and now we will have to approach the issue from a part of a different process of being, connected to some European programs in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would somebody like to step in the discussion? Yeah, Mr. Botopoulos.
Because I love the UK without having studied in the UK, I think I can afford to be blunt. I think that Brexit was a lose-lose situation. We have win-wins, which are very rare, and we have lose-lose situations. I think that Brexit, I completely concur to everything that Mr. Giras has said. The door must remain open. We must not react with animosity. This is correct. The UK is a natural ally. We have every interest to try to be together. But I fear also that the wounds created by the Brexit process, not only the result, but the process, are deep enough, and there are still, reactions from both sides. We have had this the treatment of the European citizens by the UK government, whereby they were treated a bit not only like third country people, but also a bit like unwanted people to the UK. So there is this problem going on with fishing, which is a real, yes, it's a real issue for a play by UNESCO. This is really the theater of the absurd, but it's really there, and it flares up the ethnic relations and reactions, etc., etc. So my point is, yes, everything should be done, especially by the so-called civic society, as citizens, especially the younger generation, but we must also look at the facts and take also into consideration the fact that there are very deep wounds now in the relationship. So it's both a constructive but a healing process to my eyes as well.
Mr. Pagoulatos?
Yes, lose-lose is exactly the term that I would use also, as used by Kostas Votopoulos, and I fully agree with what Mr. Giras has said. Brexit has been disastrous economically for the UK. The UK is experiencing its worst recession through the post-war period, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly one of the worst recessions, much worse than any recession being experienced by other EU member states. Now, that said, one cannot exclude the possibility that the UK economy, some years down the road, could be doing well. In fact, there is a high statistical probability that this will be the case. And then some people will pop up in various European countries and say, look, the UK has made a success out of Brexit. So there could be domino effects in the future, even though Brexit so far has proven to be mutually disastrous. One footnote to this: the UK today is in the hands, unfortunately, of English nationalists. The governments that are, the policies that are being devised are disastrous even for the integrity of the United Kingdom. One sees what happens in Scotland, the revival of the referendum demand, and even the troubles in Northern Ireland. However, there has been a silver lining with regard to the European Union, that it has probably contributed to bringing the European Union closer together. The European Union has been remarkably coherent and united when it comes to dealing with Brexit. The UK did not expect that. It was sort of, the government was in a way seeking to play governments against the other. It's been extremely coherent and cohesive. And the Commission has a great credit on that, the previous Commission. It has also helped, I would say, facilitated the process towards the Recovery Fund. The Recovery Fund probably would have not been decided perhaps so fast if the UK was sitting around the table. And I say that with regret, because I'm an even greater Anglophile than Kostas, if that can ever be, of course. But it has to be said that the UK has had an attitude of bringing obstacles on the way of steps of further integration. So at that point, it is probably better that we are marching towards separate ways, but it is clear that the UK will be and must be the closest partner to the EU in a number of ways, as mentioned by Mr. Giras, in terms of security cooperation. And this will be the case when the steam of the radical Brexiteers kind of fades away, and common interests and common values bring the two countries, and I'd like to see the EU as a country in that respect, closer together.
So if somebody does not want to add anything. So thank you for these very enlightening views about the Brexit and the UK and the EU relations right now and in the future. So I'm not sure if we have time for another question. So if yes, I would like to direct this question to the whole panel concerning Turkey. So Mr. Pagoulatos talked in his speech about how the EU and Turkey have a mutual interest when it comes to trade. Nevertheless, Turkey, as of late, has, under Mr. Erdogan's leadership, become more and more provocative. Characteristic example being how Ursula von der Leyen around a month ago was left without a chair in the meeting with Erdogan in Ankara in April. So, in your opinion, is Turkey constantly distancing itself from Europe from an ideological and political point of view? Would anybody, Mr. Pagoulatos?
Well, the brief answer is yes. However, let's be realistic. It is not just the trade interests that inevitably bind Turkey close to Europe. There's a large scale of trade interdependency and FDI interdependency of the European Union economies with Turkey. Certain countries are financially exposed to Turkey as well. Spain, for example, has a significant degree of lending to the Turkish economy. It is clear that a collapse of the Turkish economy would have negative side effects for Europe. So the European Union is trying to keep Turkey on a track of conditionality, trying to incentivize it, but also keep the rules of the game as clear as possible. That is difficult to do because Erdogan is the kind of actor that he is. He's highly unpredictable. He has developed a vision of his country and himself as a superpower, not just a regional superpower, but even a global superpower, a completely over-the-top idea as a leader of the Sunni Islam in the world and so forth. And it's difficult for him to fit in the legalistic and the rule of law framework that the European Union likes its neighbors to comply with. And there's also one additional incentive that the European Union, together with the US, do not want to lose Turkey from the West, even though Turkey is moving further from the West in terms of its values, in terms of its unlawful behavior. There is a strong interest of the transatlantic partnership to keep it in the Western camp and not to lose Turkey towards Russia or towards the growing influence of China in the region. And this is an advantage that Erdogan is aware of, and he's capitalizing on it. And then he realizes that the degree of tolerance that Western countries will be forced to show towards him is higher than any other country could be afforded. Okay, so this is the difficulty and the challenge of the partnership with Turkey. I do not expect it to become significantly better, because the problem with Turkey is not just a problem with Erdogan. It is a problem of the ideology of Turkey as a regional superpower being increasingly imbued in Turkish society, and therefore it will require a great investment of political capital on the part of the European Union, with all the challenges that Juan Schinas underlined and the difficulties in forging a common foreign policy in order to be able to have a more constructive and a more effective EU policy vis-à-vis Turkey.
So does the EU maybe appease Turkey more than it should because of all these reasons? Mr. Botopoulos.
Let me first say that I perceive the relationship of the EU with Turkey as what our French friends would say, I'm more Francophile than Anglophile, George, believe it or not. A jeu de dupe, which would, the English translation would be chicken game. You remember the chicken game that the former Minister of Finance of Greece thought that he was playing with the European Union? This is a bit a chicken game on the reverse, in the sense that everybody knows that Turkey is not anymore in a position to become a member of the European Union in the foreseeable future. But there is also, I think, every gain to rein in as much as possible Turkey within the ambit of the, not so much the European Union, but what I would say the Western values, not let the Turkey go completely outside on its own without paying respect to the rule of law, to international politics, etc., etc. So it's a double-edged sword, if I may put it so. Again, a very subtle diplomatic and political game being played with ups and downs. Sometimes we seem to be, yes, appeasing Turkey, as George in his previous intervention correctly said, there is not one attitude vis-a-vis Turkey from the European Union standpoint. The vision of European-Turkish relationship seen from Paris and from Berlin, for example, is completely different. So it's a very subtle game where we know where the reality is. And I think what we know again is that Turkey, for the foreseeable future, has not its part in the European Union, but also many interests to keep the discussion going, not to appease, but to talk with. And on that, I would slightly differ with my friend George. Of course, Erdogan is an important factor, but Erdogan will not always be there. And I'm hopeful personally that under an eventual new leader, Turkey will also change its attitude.
So if nobody has anything else to add, this event will, oh, yeah, sure.
I just want to quickly add something, because I like the way you phrased the question, or does the EU appease Turkey? And this, I think, is the main question of what I meant to say, what I'm trying to say in my first intervention is exactly that. I would say the EU does not appease Turkey, but I would say that the EU does what it is able politically and institutionally to do. And that stems from the fact that the issues with Turkey are multifaceted. There are many issues happening at the same time. But simply, member states, there is no consensus among member states about how important it is, for example, the tensions, the maritime dispute. There isn't even that strong of a feeling when it comes to the Cypriot issue. I mean, we saw radical changes in the Turkish position in the past year, and not necessarily seeing any reaction from the EU side on an institutional level. I think the main issue that can get member states absolutely moving are matters pertaining to migration. And here is, I believe that Erdogan knows this perfectly well, that he has the upper hand given the current situation of Turkey and how many refugees and migrants they are housing. And I think that he has tested the waters, and that would be the let's say the thing that could get really member states to react and allow the EU to get tough. But this is why Erdogan is not necessarily pressing on the issue right now, but may in the future. I just wanted to I think it speaks to the way this issue is talked about in Greece as well. Does the EU appease or doesn't appease? Again, it's what there is consensus among member states to do.
Thank you very much for this answer. So does anyone else want to step in? So if not, I think this panel will now come to an end. So we talked about China's growing economic and political power. We discussed Turkey's provocative stance towards the EU and the EU's appeasement towards Turkey. We touched upon the democracy and how we have today a democratic crisis, but also Britain's post-Brexit position and its unreadiness and unpreparedness to exit the EU. Finally, we discussed the dark Trump period, as Mr. Pavlatos phrased it, and the improved transatlantic relations the Biden era will now offer to us. And so I would now like to thank all of you for participating, for giving the time to participate in this event. And slowly the event will come now to a close. So I hope that as this event comes to an end, we truly hope that we will all leave the conference a bit more informed, inspired, and with food for thought. So I would also like to thank our team, Aliki Manusaki, Katerina Papachela, Elena Purnara, and Dana Sunaki, but also our school, the Moraiti School, and of course, Christina Katami, without of which the event could never have taken place. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the weekend.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stathi.